How do you say that? How do you start these? Hey y'all, it's Andrea. Today I wanted to sit down and kind of talk about all of my secrets for booking cheap flights. I get asked all the time how I travel so much, how do you travel so cheap? And one of the bigger reasons I can travel so cheap is that I'm pretty decent at finding cheap flights. I know that flights are only one portion of a vacation budget. However, they can make up quite a bit of it. And so I wanted to kind of talk about how I find cheap flights for almost all of my trips. So the first and biggest tip I can give for cheap flights is that you have to remain flexible. And I mean that with both the days that you fly, the times that you fly, and where you're flying to. So a lot of people ask me, like, what's on your bucket list or whatever? Like, where do you want to go next? Where are you going next? And my answer is always like, my bucket list is this, but where I'm going next is wherever's cheap. So I don't look at flights to where I want to go, like to the top destinations. I look at flights to wherever they're cheap. So then when I find like what areas are kind of cheap right now, I'll look at dates that are cheap. Obviously, I have more flexibility than most because my job is really flexible, but there's still a lot of ways that everybody can remain flexible with flights. So if you have to book far in advance and take off work, or some of the times of day are a lot cheaper to fly at. So like early in the morning, late at night are gonna be pretty cheap, or even times of year. So shoulder seasons are really good to visit places because usually that means that the weather is still pretty good from the on season, but you're getting those cheaper flights because not as many people are going during that time. My second tip kind of goes in with my first tip. It's to download this app called Skyscanner. Now this is not paid or anything at all. It's a completely unbiased review of this app. I've tried a lot of apps. I've tried Kayak and Hopper and all the other airline apps, and Skyscanner is by far my favorite. So you can use Skyscanner in a lot of different ways. My favorite way to use Skyscanner is the Explore feature. So I can put in St. Louis, because that's my home airport, to anywhere, like literally the little destination, like it's St. Louis to anywhere. And then in the date of travel section, I can put any time. So it's gonna go ahead and pull up a list of all the countries and here, you know what? So instead of trying to explain what the app does, I just decided to pull it up for you. So let me get it. I'm gonna do this. Okay, so I go into Skyscanner and I'm on the bottom tab with the compass that says Explore. And then I have the option, my home airport is already set to St. Louis. So I'm just gonna hit Explore Everywhere. And you'll see it already has St. Louis, and it's pulling up a list of countries I can go to with prices any time of the year. So you can kind of get the idea. So I think that's a really fun way to find destinations and a really fun way to remain flexible with destinations. So I can look at it and be like, Mexico for $216 round trip, of course, I'm there. And then it'll take me directly to like a little list of dates, and I get to pick which ones work for me, and then it'll just take me to the booking site. So that's one way to remain flexible with your destinations. That's kind of how it ties in with the first one. However, if I have to be in a certain place at a certain time, because we all have those times whenever you're like, oh, my cousin's getting married in Pittsburgh, I have to be there at this date. There's very little leeway when that happens. You can also use Skyscanner just to search. So you would, in that case, you would go ahead and put in your home airport, Pittsburgh, and then the dates that you need to be there, and it'll pull up the cheapest flights from all the airlines. I have found that Skyscanner does a really good job at pulling the cheapest ones. I imagine that Hopper and Kayak and all those other places are relatively the same when it comes to finding those flights. I use Skyscanner over all of those because of its Explore Everywhere function. I think that's really fun. One thing I will say about almost all of these sites is that they rarely include Southwest. So I like to fly Southwest when I'm in the United States. In my opinion, it's just one of the better airlines. They are usually very competitive with price, but most of the time I have to check it on my own. So in that case, if I'm booking a flight within the United States, I'll check both Skyscanner and Southwest and just compare the prices and the times. So mentioning Southwest kind of steamrolls into my next tip, which is to have airline credit cards. If you're friends with me, likely you've heard my airline credit card or just any cashback reward credit card pitch at some point. I just love the idea that I can just use a different card instead of my debit card, and because of that, I'm getting free flights. So just to start off, I have 2 Southwest cards, one for my business and one for personal, because Southwest is my primary choice in airlines when I'm flying within the United States, which is most of the time. I am planning on taking a really big international trip next year, and so because of that, I have a Delta and American card. I don't have a ton of experience with them. I'm more so going to talk about my Southwest experience, but I do have those. So that's 4 airline credit cards for me. One of the biggest tips I can give when you're applying for an airline credit card is to wait for a promotion. It seems like almost always you can get some sort of promotion for signing up, like a signing bonus. I recommend waiting for those. I waited for the Delta and American. That's how I ended up with it. I got targeted for an ad on Facebook. They're having this big thing. I went in and calculated what those points were worth, and I was like, that would probably cover my flights, and so I got the card. So that kind of piggybacks into my next tip, which is just to do the math. A lot of these airline cards will have annual fees, they'll have anniversary points, they might have other perks, like you might get more if you spend it on gas or on other airlines. So to go ahead and just do the math. For Southwest, for example, my card has a $150 fee, but I get about $200 back in travel every year. So it's more than worth it for me to keep my card if I'm gonna fly Southwest, which I do. If you're wondering which card you should get, I recommend just paying attention to what airlines you fly. So if Southwest doesn't leave out of your home airport, then don't get the Southwest card because you're not going to be using it enough to justify paying the annual fee and keeping it. If you always fly American, go ahead and apply for the American Airlines card. Get the card that you fly the most often, pay it off every month, and you'll be on your way to free flights. If you were wondering, I've seen people ask me this, the cards I specifically have are the Southwest Premier Business and the Southwest Priority for my personal. Also, I do have a full post all about the Southwest credit card and my experience with it, and I'll link it below in the description. Those are my big tips for booking airlines. I do have a couple quick tips of little things that I've noticed because I've booked so many flights, just things that I've kind of picked up on. So for Southwest, I would say that in my experience, Tuesdays, Wednesdays, and Thursdays are the cheapest days to fly. And I always like to look at the first and last nonstop of the day. Those are normally the ones that I find are the cheapest. Also, they're nonstop. Most of the time with Southwest, the nonstops are cheaper than the one with stops and the first and last one. So if you're gonna fly international and you're finding that flights out of your home airport are really expensive, I recommend getting crafty with your airports. So for example, I live in St. Louis. St. Louis is not an international hub by any means. It's not even a big airport. But when me and my mom and my sister went to Europe, we saved over $1,000 per person by flying to New York and then staying one night in New York and then flying home. And that's like including the hotel in New York City. That we still saved almost $3,000 just by doing that. And so if the flights are really expensive out of your home airport, go ahead and look at the big hubs in the United States, see if you can stay there for a night, do the math, and if it's cheaper, do it that way. This last one, I have no experience to back it up, but people say that if you book the flight on a Tuesday rather than, I know that flying on a Tuesday is a lot cheaper, but if you book the flight on a Tuesday, apparently that helps. I've heard that Sunday is the most expensive day to book. When I need to book a flight, I'm like, we're doing it, it's happening right now. I have never noticed. I will say that most of the time I'm with my family on Sundays, so I've never tried on Sundays, so maybe it's more expensive on Sundays, I'm not sure. But if you have experience with that, I'd love to hear about it in the comments. If you have any questions at all about anything in this video, I'd love to hear about it in the comments. Thank you for watching, guys. I love making these, so if you have any questions about travel or Etsy, please let me know in the comments. I'd love to answer them. See you guys soon.